Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we'll be doing something a little different. With Space Engineers 2 on the horizon, I thought it might be fun to scour the internet for some of the worst Space Engineers takes I could find. It was not fun at all. From live stream comment sections to Reddit posts to Steam reviews, my brain was turned to mush by mind-numbingly stupid comment after mind-numbingly stupid comment. That being said, I'm sure these people are just, misinformed, and that doesn't warrant any harassment from our community here. Don't seek these people out and harass them in any way, shape, or form. This video is purely for entertainment purposes, and I wish the best for everyone featured in it. I'll just have some footage playing of me building my current project ship in the background while we sift through all this. That being said, let's get into it. So, our first one here. The core of the game is a mess. It'll never be what it's setting out to be until the devs get off their butts and commit the time and effort into making it work. But I don't think we will see that. They spent their last bit of ambition for the game with planets, so I'm not expecting anything major coming to the game. This one made me giggle quite a bit. It'll never be what it's setting out to be until the devs get off their butts and commit the time and effort into making it work. Excuse me? I've literally never met a more committed software development company than Keen Software House. They spent a decade plus making Space Engineers the best it can be, and you accuse them of laziness. A lazy dev would probably abandon the game 3 years in and have cranked out 2 or 3 sequels by now. We are 11 years into this game, and it's still going strong. So, up next, we've got a first Steam review here. I bought this game years ago in early alpha. Aside from stations, it's the exact same game, which sucks. Most of the functions that were intended to end up in the game didn't, and the design team went off the cash grab deep end. I can't recommend this game to anyone. I'm disappointed, really. It could have been such a good game, but instead, it's trash. Developers need to finish this game before they try to sell me another. The exact same game? Are you kidding me? If this guy purchased this game as early as he claimed, he'd know that the footage we're seeing of Space Engineers 2 right now is about all that Space Engineers 1 had at launch. Platforms with a red and blue ship, a green station, etc. We have planets now. We have powerful endgame enemies with valuable loot. We have an entire solar system with endless potential. We have handcrafted scenarios to test you and stretch you in tons of different ways. I don't know if you guys have attempted the frostbite scenario. That'll stretch you. Stretch you real good. You can say many things about Space Engineers, but calling it the exact same game as it was a decade ago is wild. Up next is our first live stream comment. Space Engineers 1 Alpha Release, $10, Creative Arena only. Space Engineers 2 Alpha Release, $40, Creative Arena only. Space Engineers 2 DLC, $20, no additional in-game content. Why don't you just charge me for the air I breathe? My good sir, all of your complaints combined only equal $70. $50 if you don't want to bother getting the Pioneer DLC, which is literally just to support the devs. You get, I think, some concept art and the soundtrack, basically. The Ultimate Edition of Space Engineers 1, an 11-year-old game filled with all updates and DLC, costs just over $80. That price is right in line with modern AAA slop that gets abandoned after 1 year. This game is still receiving updates to this day. This next one isn't the most horrendous take known to man, but it's still rather cringeworthy. You abandoned your medieval engineer fans, and you keep most of your parts behind paywall DLCs. Will Space Engineers 2, I assume, be a different story? Space Engineers 1 isn't finished. Seems greedy. First off, I'll admit I'm not too well versed in the history of medieval engineers. It came and went during a lull in my Space Engineers playing, but my understanding of it is that they built kind of a whole new game to test out planets, gravity, and a few other physics systems before importing them into Space Engineers. I think a couple of those systems never made it, but they were more medieval focused anyways. Like, we don't really need to build catapults in Space Engineers, so obviously importing that kind of physics side wouldn't make much sense. But once that was done, they realized that splitting development time between both games was making them both worse. Keem then made the decision to kill support for medieval engineers and focus fully on Space Engineers. What many people ignore is that the game is still available and seems to have a very active workshop community, which is basically what Space Engineers has minus the yearly content updates. But anyways, medieval engineers rant over keeping most of your parts behind paywall DLCs. The purely cosmetic ones? The ones that cost like $3.99 each? How dare they make money? Shame on them. Also, Space Engineers is a game that can never be finished. It'll just continue to evolve. Space Engineers 2 is the next evolution of that. This next one comes from the Steam community page, which is a cesspool if you ever want to find some good bad takes. Some good bad takes? That's the right term? That's a great place to be. No multiplayer or survival with the release. A huge shame, honestly. Dang, man, if only there was a roadmap with those exact features on it. If only there was some way to just not buy it until it had the features you wanted implemented. That would be crazy, really. We're going to encounter an unfortunately large amount of people who don't quite realize this is a super early access alpha release for a game that probably won't even leave beta for another 4 to 5 years. This one took me by surprise. Let me read it for you. I like the game and respect authors' right to have an opinion about some real-life problems, but they should stop using my Steam library feed for political hype and can try to polish their base game instead. I grabbed this one and wasn't sure what it referenced, but thought it was funny. I just scrolled down through the Steam feed to find that it's in reference to this. How dare they? Let me read this for you just real quick. Well, actually, I don't want to read it. You can read it. It's all up on the screen there, basically. But how dare they comment on political issues occurring to them practically next door? Look at this map. I mean, Keen Software House and Ukraine are pretty darn close. Having a opinion on that is, pretty understandable. But my favorite part is if you go back to this, clearly they weren't mad enough to stop playing because they added 20 more hours to their review after this. So there's that. How can I call it a new game? Dude, they are showing Paint Gun as new stuff. Mate, it was a mod in Space Engineers. Even the blocks are the same. Ah, yes. All the same blocks. I mean, just look at that reactor. And the refinery. And the cargo container. And the gravity generator. And the gyroscope. It's the exact same. There's no improvements. Can you believe this, guys? Not one improvement. It just looks like Space Engineers 1. Up next. And now these guys decided to sell another one update as a new game. It seems like buying DLC for every major update is not enough already. Actually, this isn't even an update. It's like 100 steps backwards to provide a better base for updates moving forward. Down the line, we should be getting tons of new awesome features, including water, but Space Engineers 2 is going to be worse than the first game for maybe even like 2 years before we actually are back to, feature parity. But even back to water, I mean, the website specifically mentions building boats and submarines. So if you're looking for the next update to Space Engineers, there should be something relating to cargo ships coming this year, but don't be expecting Space Engineers 2 to be the base game of Space Engineers 1 with more already. It's gonna be a while. Here's a review for Space Engineers. TLDR. Blank. Nice. Basically, this game was long-term vaporware, and the next will be too. Don't bother. Look into Keen Software House's history as a company. They decided to never even bother finishing this game in favor of just starting another, just like they've done with their previous projects. This game was supposed to be their big turnaround, but they don't learn. Most of the consumers don't either, given the swaths of single-sentence positive reviews. Mods are the only reason to play this game. Well, it's hard to beat TLDR with nothing by it, right? It's either supposed to go at the end with a short sentence, summing it up, or at the beginning with a short sentence, and it's just blank. But that's not the funniest thing in this review. The first line using the term long-term vaporware is hysterical, right? The irony speaks for itself. How can it be vaporware if it's also long-term? I would imagine if we're doing, a rug pull style software release, it's not going to be a long-term one. So they don't really make it, There's a lot of free comedy in this image, but I personally love the 830 hours on record joke. This guy clearly played this game to death and still has the audacity to not recommend it. I'm also not sure what he means by this game was supposed to be their big turnaround. Turnaround for what? They made Minor Wars a year before releasing Space Engineers 1. There wasn't even time for the reputation to do anything that needed a turnaround. Here's a fun, simple one. Can people not just release a full game anymore? Well, there's one reason why games get released in unfinished state, and that's usually money. Games can get stuck in development and become a money sink. When a game is being developed, it makes no money at all, right? If you're not making sales, then basically you're running at a loss until you can make sales. In the case of Space Engineers 2, it's technically been in development since the VRage 3 engine started development over 3 years ago. I wasn't able to find a specific date on that, but they did have a live stream in 2022 talking about VRage 3. They have spent years building this engine without getting any money for it specifically. So the nice thing about Space Engineers is that they've had 11 plus year history proving that they won't abandon their games. They are basically the shining example of supporting and maintaining early access titles into full release. So being concerned or even just complaining about games not being complete on release, especially for a game like Space Engineers 2, is just a little absurd. Obviously, that last sentence was a little, rose-tinted glasses. So here's a perfect follow-up. How can I trust Space Engineers 2 after Medieval Engineers was abandoned? On a serious note, this is a totally valid question. If I was a fairly new player and didn't understand the history of Space Engineers and its doomed sibling Medieval Engineers, I too might be a little worried. However, something worth mentioning is that Medieval Engineers received over 5 years of updates, which I feel like doesn't get highlighted enough. It was announced in 2014 and received its last update in 2020, which is a substantial amount of time to have their resources divided between 2 games and still keep both updating. But Medieval Engineers was shut down in 2020, and I think we all know what happened that year, so it would make sense that they were reprioritizing. After 2020, we also received some of the best updates to Space Engineers we could have hoped for. 2020 gave us Pertam, 2021 Warfare 1, Heavy Industry, 2022 Warfare 2, Most Wanted, 2023 Automatons, Warfare Evolution, etc. Let's be clear, if Medieval Engineers was supposed to be the testbed that would allow Space Engineers to flourish, it succeeded far beyond expectations, right? I mean, immediately following the shuttering of support for Medieval Engineers, we got the best Space Engineers updates to date, basically, besides planets. If you want to see kind of more of a deep dive into the history of Medieval Engineers, I would love to research it more heavily. So if you want to see a video on that, comment down below. But bringing it back to this original comment, how can we trust Space Engineers 2 after Medieval Engineers was abandoned? By understanding that Space Engineers 1 is Keen's greatest success, right? And their sequel is critical to the future of the company and their continued success. They kind of have no choice but to deliver on the promises for Space Engineers 2, and they have the roadmap laid out to make that happen. So, yeah, don't want to be worried about it. We're good. We're good. All right, for our last one here, I've settled on this nice, lengthy community post by Delta. He's got a list of reasons why he will not be purchasing Space Engineers 2. Number 1, the recommended GPU requirement is absurd. It's almost like it's a recommendation, not the minimum. If you'd like to run the game with low settings, you can use the 6-year-old GTX 1660 Super. I won't lie that the recommended specs are a little high, but this game will likely be another 10-plus year project for Keen. In 10 years, do you think we'll be complaining about not having a 3080 or better? Probably not. Though, actually, with the way console players have been these days, we might just be complaining. Side note, the PlayStation 5 launched in 2020. If you're on a last-gen console and are mad that game companies aren't still supporting your e-waste gaming brick, you're in the wrong, not them. Okay, moving on to number 2. You're doing a pre-order for early access. I can't help but laugh at the sheer audacity of such behavior. It was like a month of wait, dude. They told us the exact date it was launching and simply provided the option for people to pay earlier. If you want to wait until it launches to purchase, that's perfectly fine. There was literally no incentive to pre-order. There was no, goodies if you paid a month early. It was just the fact that you can't fathom the sheer audacity of such behavior is a you problem. Number 3, your past history with completely ignoring and even censoring criticism. If it doesn't come from the hive mind, you don't listen. This has so much evidence to the contrary that it's actually crazy. Even before planets were added, the community had been clamoring for NPCs, stations, and ships and all that to be added in a meaningful way. We only got NPC stations in 2019, years later. To this day, the most common request is probably tied between getting real NPCs and an endgame goal. For all intents and purposes, that request has been ignored, but will never be implemented in Space Engineers 1. We're getting NPCs in Space Engineers 2, but still no word on endgame goals. So don't go blabbing about the hive mind being the only ones getting what they want, because we have gone hungry on a couple of sore subjects around here. Number 4 is almost a downright accusation, and a dangerous one at that. You're abusing the Steam Early Access system, just like most of your other games. Per the Steam Early Access documentation, early access is not a way to crowdfund development of your product. Well, let's take a gander at what the Space Engineers 2 Steam page says, shall we? Coming soon to early access. Why early access? Space Engineers 2 is a very ambitious game, and we feel that early access is a great opportunity to shape its future in cooperation with the community. Player feedback has always been a crucial part of the game development process for us, and Space Engineers 2 is no exception. Well, would you look at that? Not one word about doing it purely for the money. But if we want to quote the Steam Early Access documentation, let's do it properly, shall we? You should not use early access solely to fund development. They're not. They have multiple releases funding development. If you are counting on selling a specific number of units to complete your game, then you need to think carefully about what it would mean for you or your team if you don't sell that many units. Are you willing to continue developing the game without any sales? Are you willing to seek other forms of investment? Keen thankfully has many games that can fund the continued development of their new game. The intentions from their early access post on the store page is clear. They're doing it this way to facilitate a community-led development where we, the community, help guide the developers on what we do and do not like. Number 5 is the same old "what about medieval engineers" rant that we've debunked a few times this video, but just want to point out that acting like medieval and space engineers are broken is beyond disingenuous. Both games have received over a decade of updates combined, and both are completely playable. I can't speak to Minor Wars as it's not a game I've played or am even really aware of, but the other two are totally working. And in Space Engineer's case, it's a masterpiece, ready to be played by all. But what about you guys? Have you seen some horrendous takes about space engineers around the internet? This was just a small sampling, unfortunately. So let me know if you'd like for me to make a part 2 of this series. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of bad takes out there. Another reminder here at the end, just to those watching, not to seek out these commentators and bully them in any way. Hate the take, not the community member. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.